Very good. And just a couple of overview slides just before we get into things. Remember, so the Zoom client, I'm really hoping that everyone here, right, has downloaded the Zoom client for their computer or their iPad or their phone, however they're viewing these phones, however they're viewing these videos. Now, the point, you can just go right to zoom.us and download it. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that Zoom does update this app regularly, for security reasons and for operating system updates and so forth. So it's useful to check for updates occasionally when you're on Zoom to make sure that there are no issues with getting bounced out of Zoom or not being able to control all your Zoom controls. And so it's very clear in terms of how to do this check for updates. As it said in the text right there, just go into your little face up there, your little picture in the upper right corner, click on it, and you'll see a drop down to say check for updates. And you can check for updates there. And if there's an update, you got an update. But I just checked yesterday, and this latest update, is 6.7.2. So you can check right now. If you don't have 6.7.2, you're eligible for an update. And it's just always useful to make sure that you've got the right version to play with. Okay. So another couple of quick updates. I attended a webinar yesterday from Cornell University up there, and they of course sponsor the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And there's a new website and a new program they're offering, Garden for Birds, gardenforbirds.org. And so this is my little plug as a birder, right, to join in on this. It's all free, of course, and great opportunities for some continuing ed, and of course, great opportunities to actually start making a difference relative to what you can do in your landscape, in your garden for birds. So the point they made yesterday in the webinar is that 60% of land in the United States is privately owned. So that means you've got 135 million acres, right? And so most all of the impact that we can make for birds is privately owned. And so some of the examples they were starting to make here in terms of what you can do with your own landscape in terms of changing it dramatically to allow for birds. And one of the examples they really emphasized was this study here, 2019 to 2024, what these folks did in their own converting this lawn-based landscape to to a richly shrubbed and treed landscape. Now, mind you, we as master gardeners might look at this landscape to the right and say that's a little overdone. Because there clearly is no capacity for sunlight coming into the house, and they clearly have consumed the entire house. So perhaps right place, right plant may not work in this capacity. But the example I wanted to show here is that look at how many different bird species popped up just in year to year, over that same landscape.
Wow.
So it's just a little plug for what you can do in making a big difference relative to birds. Because the moral of the story here is that we've lost 1/3 of all birds in the world since 1970. So think about that. I mean, the birds are really having a tough time relative to habitat, relative to wind strikes, and so forth. And so there's a huge opportunity here of making an opportunity. And so on this website, gardenforbirds.org, there are native plant recommendations for various areas. And so there's my little plug for what we can do here. So questions or comments regarding gardening for birds, landscaping for birds? Anybody? Thoughts?
I was just going to say when we logged our hillside 3 years ago, coming up our driveway, on the hill, the whole left side, we took like 65 trees out of there. They were all alder trees, almost all of them, but a lot of just shrubs. Everything kind of went with it when we logged. And oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting the following spring we had no birds. Like our backyard, which was usually teeming with birds, and it's a kind of a ways away from where the hillside is, but there was no birds. Steve and I just were like, why don't we have any birds? Where'd they all go? And we realized because we took all those trees out. And we immediately went and, we planted it back up with so much natives now, and we're starting to get a lot more birds back. But they just went away. They just didn't want to be here. because their area was gone.
Yeah. That's a great example. And obviously, with your replanting into natives, you undoubtedly are going to see increasing populations and diverse flocks coming through. Any other comments? Okay, so check out gardenforbirds.org. So, today's presentation and is going to be from Tobey Nelson, who's going to join us here. She is a certified professional horticulturalist. And she'll be joining us here actually at the recommendation of you, Elizabeth Sims, because you saw her present at a Whidbey Island Master Gardener training a couple years ago. And so reached out to Tobey, and she's going to be joining us here. She actually also has a handout that I'll be sharing in the chat. So get tuned in to it to look for your chat because I'm going to be putting a document in there, for recommendations. We've got a lot of stuff to cover here today as we get into it all, a lot of announcements. First of all, according to calendars and things, what we've got today is that is the board meeting at 1 o'clock. Everyone is welcome to join the board meeting at 1 p.m. It's the same URL, the same Zoom URL that we're on here today. Quick shout out for a visit we had last Friday in Pacific County here. Rita assembled a team of volunteers and we cleaned out a greenhouse that is on the WSU Long Beach Research Center facility that we intend to use down here in Pacific County for demonstration garden purposes. Rita, do you have any update for us relative to the memo of understanding and the activities we've got going on there?
I don't have an update on the MOA. Hopefully, I can touch base later today and maybe get an update. But we're moving forward. I think that's the important thing. It's cleaned out, it's now ready to go to the next phase, which I think we need to, Pacific County Master Gardeners need to meet and talk about what we need to do and when we need to do it, because I understand we're going to be having a whole bunch of bare root plants coming in just a few weeks.
That is our plan. So we'll look for continuing updates and looking for pictures and so forth as that progresses. It looks like this Thursday there's a coastal Grays Harbor meeting at Peggy or anybody from Ocean Shores want to comment on that meeting and the content?
That meeting will be at 6 o'clock at the Ocean Shores Library, and we cover our workshops and other activities that we have going on in the area, and and usually have some good food to eat.
Oh, food! There you go. You should have led with that. And training, of course, in the 14th. And any comments from Wendy or the other trainers, their trainer leads in the different counties, in terms of what we're going to be doing on Valentine's Day for training?
Well, I'm the team leader for Pacific County for this workshop, and we're going to be having the workshop at the Columbia Pacific Heritage Museum Native Plant Garden. So obviously we'll be talking about native plants, trees and shrubs, and our pruning people will be there as well. So it'll be a fun day, and it's not supposed to rain all that much. So, but those of you still bring your rain gear just in case.
Yeah, and we're meeting at Terry Small's house. The Grays Harbor area is meeting at Terry Small's house, and we are walking around her garden and doing lots of fun things through the garden. I think everybody here. Oh, sorry, Terry, you're here. You probably could have talked. Sorry, I can be quiet.
Terry isn't here, is she?
Yes, she is.
And I can bet that, Terry, you're going to offer a special prize for any trainee or any attendee at your garden that can identify half of the plants that you've listed out in your inventory.
I had plant tags that I prepared for a different Master Gardener event, and I probably had about 30 of them. And I spent an evening a couple of days ago pretty much making 30 more.
Oh,
And
God.
So, yeah.
I surprised myself. I have such a interesting collection of trees, and so it's going to be an interesting winter twig walk that we're going to have as one of the activities. Another activity is going to be native plants, like Long Beach is doing, and I have integrated native plants into every single bed in my garden. So while that walk will concentrate in one area, they're pretty much everywhere. They're very inclusive in my garden. And we have another activity that's going to be redesigning an area that got smashed by, I mean, truly devastated by some huge limbs that came down. So that I think will be kind of fun for our trainees to look at a bunch of potted plants that I'm going to put in that area and take a stab at arranging them to work with the new light conditions. And then fourth activity is going to talk about climate change, looking off my deck at what's going on with Grays Harbor and the beach in front of our house. So I'm as you can probably tell, kind of excited because
That's good.
there's lots to talk about.
Wendy, do you want to make any comments regarding opportunities for us for Master Gardeners to attend either of these sessions for continuing education?
Oh yeah, anytime any of them, any certified master gardener that comes, if they aren't teaching, then they are getting continuing education. So if somebody else extra is going to come, let Terry know though, because she has it planned out for meal and stuff. So make sure you email her.
Very good. And then, of course, next week, Gwen, I guess you're leading a group over at the Polson Museum.
Yes, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the Polson Garden and how it was started and everything. And then talking about the different roses that we have, the different types, some of the pest and disease challenges and how we are approaching those. And then doing a little pruning. So we'll be teaching some pruning, and if anybody wants to bring their gloves and their pruners, then they can dig in and get some hands-on training. So, and that's weather. It's whatever the weather's going to be. We're going to be doing it. We have free access. All the master gardeners get free admission to the museum, so you can come early or stay late to check out the museum. We are going to be, if it's raining outside, we'll do our talking portion inside the museum, and then we'll don our rain gear and go out into the garden. So just be prepared for weather.
And then
this is Midge. And you get CE credits for this too, because it's study group. So
that's right.
Please come.
What time was that?
At 1 o'clock.
At 1 o'clock.
1 p.m. on Thursday.
And
then last but
museum opens at 11, is that right?
Correct. 11 to 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And last but not least on the calendar, we got a Greater Grays Harbor meeting next Friday. Sally, you're with us. Do you want to talk about the meeting? And we welcome you as the director. Lori was successful in it in passing the torch on.
We appreciate it.
Sally, you're on mute, Sally, if you want to unmute and share anything. Well, no stress. We'll catch you later. So again,
Kelly. Oh, sorry, Kelly. Can I have one more thing to add?
Sure.
On the 15th, the Greater Grays Harbor area are getting together at the extension office in the afternoon to figure out all of our workshops and stuff for the season. So anybody that you should have gotten an email, but if you're interested and you didn't receive an email, anybody is welcome to come.
And then just a quick reminder that all of these activities, although I didn't catch the one on the 15th, but all these activities are in the e-news. And so if folks are not receiving the e-news that Katie sends out on that Friday before, our second Tuesday meeting, give Katie a holler and we'll make sure that there's issues that, because I can check, if indeed an email is received. I can check in terms of an email is received by you, by your server. So Google gives us that facilities. Okay. Um, key dates, by the way, just looking ahead outside of February and for the months ahead, our home and garden show coming up on May 16th and 17th. And that, of course, includes there's planning and preparation and setup the days before that. May 9th, the Saturday before Mother's Day, the big plant sale that we have. July 18th, our garden tour. So this is truly an all hands on deck activities for us here. So we look forward to, everybody plotting these dates on the calendar here and making sure that they're ready for us. Hey, Sally, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Again, you want to go back and share a little comment here and introduce yourself? You're so shy. We'll get you here later. Okay, quick reminder about who we meet today. Of course, we meet today as we gather here as Master Gardeners under the WSU Extension Program. We all maintain our certifications, both in continuing education and in program service hours. We are also, those of us that opt in, and a simple verbal opting in is sufficient here. All of us opt in to become a member of a foundation. The foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit recognized in the state of Washington and by the IRS. And our entire function as a foundation is to support the program. We raise money because we as a foundation need to raise that money to support the program here in our two counties. The foundation, go ahead, please.
Can I talk about the calendar just for a second? Back up sorry. Yeah, one of the things after Sunday, we hope to have the Give Pulse calendar, not only the foundation calendar updated, but also the Give Pulse. And you can go onto the Give Pulse calendar on your dashboard and sign up for these. So you don't have to remember later to put your hours in. So as soon as that is completely full, I will share my screen, or if you want me to share it really quickly and show you how to do that, I can do that.
I'll stop sharing. Go ahead. Jump on.
So when you go into your dashboard, it should look like this. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. So you do need to make sure that it says WSU Grace Harbor Pacific County Master Gardeners. You should see my picture on there. Pretty soon it'll probably be somebody else. We're hoping Erin, but we'll see. Okay, so these are you can see some of the things that are on the calendar, but easier to look at it, you just go to this little tiny calendar, click on that, and it shows you the month. And then it shows you what you can sign up for. So let me go to, I've already signed up for these, so it shows a little bit different. Let me go to here. Okay, so Plant Clinic, let's say that I'm going to sign up for Plant Clinic. I click on that and I just register it. There's only 7 spots remaining. I register, it tells me I'm registered. So now when it happens, I will receive an email the day before, and then you go to it, and then after you'll receive an email saying, did you attend? And then you say yes, and you go in and click on it. You are able to change the hours, but you're not able to change the tag. For example, this meeting today is the continuing education. I think I put it under continuing education. So you can't change that because I've tagged it, but you can change the hours. So if you put more hours in. So anyway, that's how it works. It's super easy. It should be a complete calendar. Again, I put in the 15th just for the Greater Grace Harbor, but once you register, it shows you that you have already registered for it. So, and you can register for this particular meeting for the whole year. And again, if we cancel a meeting or anything, it's easy for us to notify people that we've canceled it, or notify people that the date has changed or the time has changed. So hopefully that helps. It really is easy to use and helps us, and it helps you not have to remember to put your hours in. So hopefully that makes sense.
Questions or comments for Wendy regarding this? This indeed is a big help, Wendy. Thank you for making the effort in making Give Pulse that much easier to work with.
I do have a question.
Okay.
If we haven't signed up, like I didn't sign up for today's meeting, does this mean we don't have to break it down into, say, a half hour for the general meeting and an hour for CE, or however the time works out?
Yeah, because I've already tagged it as continuing ed. So,
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
We like simple.
Yes, we do.
Hey, so continuing on then is that remember our foundation board for 2026 is as presented here on the screen. Again, a reminder, we meet as a board then to decide board business at 1 o'clock today on the same Zoom URL. Again, a recognition that our three geographic regions, right, are led by Rita here in Pacific County, by Sally in Greater Grays Harbor, and by Peggy and Wendy over in Coastal Grays Harbor. So again, this is in recognition of the fact that we have a huge territory of 3,500 square miles that we have to connect here. So Jennifer, of course, is our state director. Our coordinators are Aaron and Wendy. And we definitely do have some announcements we'll be talking about here. I'll be talking about here in a couple minutes regarding the opportunities for a permanent coordinator, a paid coordinator from WSU. So a reminder to all of us that we're a service organization. And so this is our opportunity to step up and volunteer. And I think as you've certainly been seeing through e-news and through the present and through just some of the discussion we've been having here, there's a mega opportunity to engage. And this is indeed what it's all about, being a master gardener here. Quick comment on Tapio Moment. Again, I love looking through Don's book, right? You know, and if you don't have Don's book yourself, make sure you're checking it out of the library, because this is a treasure trove of articles that Don wrote, right, over the decades that he contributed articles to our regional newspapers. Now, I love the comment he made here on the February 15th entry from 2010. Look how he says about holding off working the soil, right, until it's ready. And he says, you know, if it crumbles like chocolate cake, it's ready to work. Now I'm wondering, why should chocolate cake be crumbly? You know, I don't get that, right? You know, where is that? Where is he coming from? I don't want to insult his mother, perhaps, as baking very dry chocolate cake, but I'm wondering, where did that come from? So anyway, it's amusing that he used that turn of phrase. He also makes a point on the February 1st entry from 2010 about soil testing, and he makes that comment. You know, if you're not testing, you're guessing. And this is the recommendation we have, you know, I'm putting it out here, not as a specific brand recommendation per se, but the Thurston County Conservation District does have a very worthwhile and straightforward testing program. And it's a $25 report that you can check out. And it's very straightforward from Thurston County Conservation District. And it's one of the easiest paths to getting a soil test done. And so I don't want to specifically say as a master gardener that we are recommending Thurston County over other soil labs that are available to us, but pushing it out there that this is an easy one. And Val, you have a comment?
I tested a number of my beds for our training session. And I've always appreciated the work that they do, and they're so community oriented. So, and the reports are absolutely phenomenal. First, they'll tell you how it tests, and then what you can do about it. So I highly recommend them as a personal gardener.
There you go.
And I recommend them to anybody because they're so good and we have so few available around us. So
I have a question about soil testing. So I never ever, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we might have had our soil tested. I don't know. I've never had it done because I always think every one of my gardens has a different soil. Even in like my vegetable garden, we have raised beds. Well, who knows what I've dumped in there? Like I might put some kind of compost on one side and some kind of another compost on the other side. And I throw all kinds of stuff in there. So I think, what good does it do just to take one piece out and pay $25? And then what about in another bed? It might be completely different.
Does anyone want to offer Robin the recommendation based upon her point that we have multiple beds with different soil types? Val?
you take a little bit of each area and mix them together.
Oh, is that what you do? Okay.
Well, that's one solution, but actually a more proper solution I was getting to is that, yeah, you got to test for different beds. If you have different soil types and different spaces.
If you have different soil types, exactly. So
yeah, so like what I did for mine when I did my vegetable beds, because I know they all had the same soil at the same time, I took just like a hefty scoop from each bed, mixed it all together, and then submitted a portion of that as my sample. And so if you're doing a whole garden bed, like a large landscape bed, you want to take from different areas of the bed, and they'll give you an overall recommendation. But if you know your soil is very different in each of your beds, you would have to test each bed individually.
And so that goes to the point, for example, I have a peony bed, which likes, a far more alkaline soil than some of the, say, where the blueberries, are, and the garden beds are a whole different, intent of vegetable beds, right? A whole different intent of where the gardening. So yes, it does, it's different test.
That's the caveat. If you have different areas for different plants, obviously you don't want your blueberries in your veggie beds, because the pHs are so different. So, yeah.
Wendy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that people say, well, it might be expensive to get this done. However, if you look at those home tests, now they cost $17 to $25 a piece now too. So you might as well get a professional test done.
There you go. Any other comments regarding soil testing? It's important that we set the example. We tell all of our clients, right, at the plant clinics to get their soil tested, but it's important that we walk the talk and get it done ourselves. Okay, a quick walking through on it on the gardening to-dos from OSU. OSU, of course, is also pushing testing your soil, and they're suggesting it as well as thinking about planning for herbs and planning for flowering landscapes. And of course, I think we just got our territorial seed catalog within the last 10 days or so. So it's out there. It's time to start, making sure those seeds are ordered ahead of being sold out, mind you, right? So this is the time to be thinking about let's be prompt on this and not delay. Soil testing labs, I mentioned Thurston County, but of course, WSU and OSU both publish approved labs for soil testing. And both of these are available from WSU and OSU as you may want to grab. February to-dos continuing on relative to what you can do in respect to building a cold frame or hotbed. What you can do to be starting to think about what you can, preparing the soils to get ready for gardening. And OSU has this great little flyer here about how to build, a raised bed, a hoop house like structure. So there's lots of opportunities to garden throughout this wet period with protection and to start warming the soils. Still a good time to prune as well. planting, I always love this comment here about from OSU, because they must think they're in the balmy tropics with respect to the temperatures required for their soils to germinate, and it's going to be a long way before our soil temps are at this level. Um, but they do recommend, for obviously indoor planting and starting to get seeds and seedlings ready that can be hardened off and planted into the garden here. So so again, from Oregon, they're very optimistic about what they can be still doing out there, and I'm afraid we're still a little ways away. Hey, some great pictures here about cankered limbs and pruning, and this is a great opportunity of pruning, just as Terry was indicating about winter damage to your garden. How can you ensure that when limbs have come down, branches have broken off, that you're not creating a hazard, either for safety reasons or a hazard for the tree itself in terms of inviting virus and an insect entries into the trees there. Okay. Any other comments regarding gardening? Any other garden habits that anybody here has relative to February? Things that you all want to get done? Gwen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question, and maybe Robin can answer this. The dormant sprays and stuff. I was at my friend's house. I don't have fruit trees, but I was at my friend's house. She has pear trees, and they're already like starting to bud out here in Hoquiam. And so, because we've had such a warm winter here, and you know, uh, do we just have to skip that now, or is it still okay a little? I mean, they're not greatly budding out, but that's my question.
Well, Steve's the fruit tree guy, but I know he's getting ready to spray dormant spray.
Okay.
So Steve is spraying your fruit trees, your orchard, even though, like Gwen, I'm also seeing buds on the fruit trees.
I haven't. He's just doing it right now. I don't know. I haven't seen any buds, but
I think it's probably a good caution, Gwen, is that time's a wasting. Get out there and get it done, right?
Yeah. Well, I noticed that on the dormant spray that I have for the roses, it says that you can go up to like a quarter of an inch of new growth, and then you can do it again, and up to a half an inch. So it said that you can do it with little bit of growth coming out. So, and that's where with that, it's before we're going to be pruning later in March. So it doesn't really matter if it's damaging some of that new growth, because you're going to prune it off anyway. So
yeah. What dormant spray do you use for the roses?
So it's a Bonide. That's the brand name. They have it at Tractor Supply. So
okay. You want to spell that, Gwen?
Bonide.
Bonide.
Yeah, dormant spray. Yeah. And yeah, they have it at Tractor Supply. That's the least expensive place that I've kind of searched around. And then I had a question, because I was going to spray the roses like a couple of weeks ago, because we had that little warm weather stint, but the nighttime temperatures were dipping below 40 degrees, and it said don't spray if it's below 40 degrees. So I emailed them and I said, hey, here's the situation. I have like 40 degrees plus during the day, but it's dipping below that at night. Can I spray during the day, and will it be okay? And they said, no, wait until you have 24 hours of 40-degree temperatures so that it dries, so that it's not like freezing on the plant at all. So So I had to kind of wait. But now, the temperatures have popped back up. So
Okay, good recommendations. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts regarding February to-dos, gardening activities that you're engaged in?
Well, it's time to get out there pretty soon and cut back all the roses and stuff and the hydrangeas. But the other day, everybody's going on and on about this early spring we're having and all these, everything's starting to bud out and bloom. And I looked in the Farmer's Almanac and that's for this year that's already been published, and it said we're going to have a cool late spring. I'm like, what? Like here everybody's talking about this early spring we're having, but maybe it's going to change and go back into cool for a long
Well,
time.
and you'll see, I know in subsequent months, in March or April, I will present once again the WSU calendar that indicates we can have a frost as late as May, mid-May for parts of our geography here. So we still have a lot of winter left.
That's what it was saying, that normally around the 5th of May is when they say our last frost, but this year they're saying maybe the 20th of May.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy?
Hey, a couple of announcements as we get into it. I think this was we talked about this on it, I think on e-news here, but WSU Jobs has a job posting just made for us, right? For a small farms and master gardener coordinator here. So this is Wendy, Aaron, you want to comment on this new posting, on this new opportunity?
Well, other than we're super excited for it, I think anybody can apply. I don't know when the position closes, but we're hoping, of course,
February 17th, it says. February 17th.
So, yeah,
Another week.
We're excited.
So I know Dan is hoping to have the person, whoever they hire, up and running by mid-March. It is listed as a temporary position because it is contingent on continued funding from Grace Harbor County.
And I love in the posting here, it says, is that, hey, your job is to support more than 75 trained volunteers out there. That's for sure. I don't know whether that's enticing or intimidating, right? Talk about herding cats.
Yeah. More like 101, but yeah.
Anyway, so the job posting is open there. You can go to WSU to find out more information, this jobs posting information, or reach out to either Wendy or Aaron for details.
And you should have received a link in your email last week. So if you didn't, you can email me.
Okay. Other questions regarding recording hours, and Wendy went into some of that earlier on the calendar. But a quick reminder, there's so much going on, right? If we don't get on to Give Pulse and enter these hours, I'm speaking from experience, you end up losing track of just what you've done, when, and where. So keep after it because we're into a new year here. So it's time to start accruing new continuing education and volunteer hours.
Yeah, and this part is very important for all of us to let the county commissioners know that we're putting all these hours in, and WSU as well. And these reports do go to obviously WSU, but also nationally. So it's really important that we put all of our hours in.
And as Wendy pointed out early on, the calendar on our website on pnwmg, it can be an easy path to getting those hours recorded. Okay. Any other announcements? Other news? Again, check e-news. Be sure you're checking e-news for all the activities you got going on.
Kelly, one thing, after Kim's thing last month, she said she is having an open house in her rose garden once again, July 26th, and starts at 10, and she did 2 different tours last year, one at 10 and one at 1. And if anybody's interested, I am definitely going to go. So
again, that's Kim Arian, right, in the gorge, and it's just as we've heard from her, it's an incredibly challenging microclimate she has to deal with, but it's phenomenal what she's able to grow there. So a great learning opportunity.
It's absolutely amazing. So it's really worth the trip, and she makes the day really fun. And it's all she's now becoming a master gardener down there on the Oregon side, but her Rose Society friends will also be there. So yeah, it's a good group.
Other announcements, other comments.
Yeah, I've got a unrelated to Master Gardener, but for your information, February 28th, that's a Saturday, from probably 9 to 3 or in there, we're going to have another major ivory pulling party up at Lake Sylvia. Noxious Weed Board is sponsoring it. And if you've got any aggressions, any frustrations, anything like that you want to tear out, I've got just the place for you to do it. If you're not into tearing things out, I need some additional help in the way of getting people signed in and signed out. That's item one. Item two, Ocean Shores people aren't concerned about this, but the rest of us are, Pacific and Grace Harbor counties. Timberland Regional Library System has just discovered a shortfall of several $1,000,000. That was just after, well, back in November, they decided to give administrators numbers 2 and 3 a 15% raise. And now they're saying they're going to have to fire about 30 of the staff. There's a Timberland Regional Library board meeting today via Zoom at 4:30. You go to trl.org. You go clear to the bottom of the page where it says About Us. It says underneath that, that's on the left, it says Board. Click on that, and I think you can get yourself figured out how to get on and listen. People are writing letters of concern. It is a major concern. There are supposed to be 7 members on the board. The board is not paid, so don't yell at them. The board is told by the administration what is going on. The administration let them down. There's no way around that. And our okay.
So let's just let folks join in on the meeting this afternoon if they have an opportunity. Thanks,
right,
Ellen.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other announcements? Any other news? Okay. In fact, Helen, if you want to put some of those links into the chat, that'd be a great way that folks can reference them. Because in the chat, I want to make note that I've already put in the handout for today's presentation. So there's a PDF in the chat that Tobey, who's here with us this morning, will speak to and will speak about. Tobey, we're thrilled to welcome you here. Again, it was that your presentation at a prior Whidbey Island training session that led us to reach out to you. And we're very excited to hear from you in terms of what we can be doing, especially as master gardeners, and working with the public in helping them better prepare their landscapes and their gardens for pollinator support as we get into the spring. So I'm going to stop my share, Tobey, turn it over to you, and let you go ahead and introduce yourself and take it from there.
All right. So can you hear me?
We can hear you indeed.
Excellent. And can you see my screen?
It is coming up. Now, we're not seeing the slideshow. We're seeing the PowerPoint.
How about now?
We are there.
And do you see the little Zoom box with people on the side of the screen that I see? I hope not.
You can deal with that. So what
is it gone?
What we're recording here.
Okay.
Is just putting the active speaker video and your slide deck.
Great. Well, hello, and thank you for having me today to talk about pollinator gardening. I do want to remind, especially because this is getting recorded, so I don't know if the chat goes with the recording, but if you would like a handout from this, please do just email me. at toby@tobeynelson.com, and that email will appear at the end of the slideshow. I thought it was going to pop up here, but it's not. So, because I know that many of you do your own educating of the public. And so the handout is very robust with some details and quotes and factoids and references that I may not read. I'm doing about 4 talks worth of information I'm going to try to cram into this talk. So I might gloss over some little tiny bits. Definitely pop up a question in the chat that we can look at after I'm done with the talk. But you'll definitely want that handout for some of the richness that's in there. So, okay, why are you not advancing, little slide? There we go. Oh, now it might advance a billion things because I pressed it a bunch. But why do we care about pollinators? Well, for starters, they are really important for our food supply. And I'm guessing that all of you master gardeners know that. But also, they're really important for ecosystem evolution. So we need to remember that and this is a honeybee. I know the honeybee is maybe one of the more contentious pollinators, but it's the, cute video. So, but many different pollinators are responsible for helping all plants make seeds, and that is how ecosystems can evolve. So in this era of climate change, when our ecosystems are changing dramatically, it's really important that we have a healthy host of pollinators to help our ecosystems evolve. So who are pollinators? Sometimes people only think about insects, or sometimes they think just about bees, but it is important to remember that we have, I hope you can see my cursor, we have, this is actually a drone fly who is impersonating a bee. Butterflies, hoverflies, hummingbirds, wasps, bats, sometimes random beetles are pollinators as well. So we need to think a bit broadly about that in our gardens. And we really need to consider the life cycle of the critters because their needs change with different phases of their life cycle. So, some of the more diverse populations of pollinators would be our native bees. And I've got it listed in the handout who this is, but we've got orchard bees, orchard mason bees. That's the blue friend here. There are digger bees. There's the longhorned bee. This is a yellow-faced bumblebee. There's many types of bumblebees. We've got sweat bees. They're usually green, but there's many different kinds, and leaf cutters. So there's many other types of native bees. I think we have like 4,000 native bees in North America, and we have about 800 of those in Washington. And sadly, many of them are becoming endangered and extinct. So I've definitely got some factoids about that in the handout. So we really need to work on maintaining and creating and protecting habitat for all those critters. When we talk about butterflies and moths, this is when being mindful of the life cycle really becomes important because the way that we behave in our gardens affects all of them, but particularly when we think about the egg cases. And so when we think about work to do at this time of year, I didn't hear many of you saying that, we need to get out there and tidy up our gardens. And I'm glad because we want to be holding off on tidying those gardens until we've had reliably warm weather and until some of these life cycles have been able to cycle through because we have egg cases and larvae that are overwintering in the gardens. And then the larvae often will have a different food requirement than the adult. So it's particularly important when we're thinking about butterflies and moths that we remember that they need a lot of foliage plants. And many of these foliage plants are what people consider junk plants. So like the alders and the nettles and willows and poplars, things like that and many like grasses are really important larval plants for the butterfly. And I offer garden consulting and design. And I've definitely had more than once when I've gone to someone's house and they say, "Oh, we want to have a pollinator garden. We've cut everything down and now we're ready to put our pollinator garden in." And it's like, well, you probably just removed a huge amount of what would be beneficial habitat. So, got to think about that life cycle. And then we need to start thinking about what is a garden and why do we garden? And I would like us to see less and encourage less of this image here on, well, the grassy image, where we have distinct little plants carved into little shapes, lots of mulch in between. There's probably landscape fabric under there, and adapt more of an ecosystem mindset towards our gardens. We really need to remember that gardens are habitat. And so in this world of conservation gardening and pollinator gardening, we need to start thinking about the idea of social contagion and what our like social community controls are. So for too long, we've had these kind of, I think they're becoming outdated images of beauty and aesthetic and what is the right way to garden from a aesthetic standpoint. And we need to shake that up, because if we can be the people on our streets and in our neighborhoods, and especially in our homeowner associations, that can start to educate our neighbors, and we can be the example of what a garden could be and why we need that, we will be able to affect the social contagion. We will be able to change people's minds about what a garden could be and should be. And we can really start to make a difference. And pollinators are a really important opportunity because it's so much easier to affect habitat for them. Small scale works. So we're not talking about making habitat for bison here. We're talking about these little creatures where a little area matters. So in your handout, I've referenced a great study and write-up that was called Create, and it's by Murphy and Crone of Tufts University. But I love this quote from them. They say, "Pollinator gardening is one of the most attainable forms of conservation. Homeowners and especially neighborhoods can be connections between wild areas. The need for space is small enough to amount to something big." So I think that's what we need to remember, is that we really can make a difference in our garden. And I think about that slide that you showed, Kelly, at the beginning from Cornell, and the difference just in a few years in a very small spot. It's big. So let's think first. So not only do we need to think about like the life cycle of pollinators and who they are, but let's think about what healthy habitat is. And this will be a cue for things you can include in your garden. And then I'll give you lots of inspiration and ideas. So we need to think about food. So many times when we're in a garden center and they're talking about pollinator garden, they're selling the flowers, which is great. Different pollinators need different types of flowers. So here on our picture, we see the hummingbird and the butterfly, and those are both creatures that need usually a tubular shaped flower because their tongues are long or their beaks are long. Whereas bees tend to want more of a flat flower, like this yellow, maybe it's a Rudbeckia or Arnica or something in there. Those Compositae family flowers are really great for bees because they have a real open center. And like the yarrow and the umbellifers, like carrots and Queen Anne's lace and angelicas, those are great for lots of creatures, a lot of bees, hoverflies and things like that. So lots of different flower shapes and different flower colors, but not just flowers. We need to think about fruit. I don't know if any of you folks have apple trees in your yards that have the fruit still hanging from the branches. But if you do, watch in the morning the apples probably have gotten pecked open at the top or gnawed open at the top, and they will collect dew or rainwater. And I see lots of different creatures landing, and they might be, carving off a chunk of the actual apple flesh. But I also see a lot of hummingbirds landing, and they're sipping that juice out. So the fermenting fruit, to some extent, I know it's a rat attractant, but it also can be really important for our wildlife. And then we do need to remember the leaves are very important food sources. So willows, deschampsia, alders, nettles, there's many, and many listed on the handout too. This is where it is very important to include the natives, because usually the larval form of the insect is more particular or more specific about the food source that it needs. So, for instance, if we think about monarchs, and they have to have a milkweed. So that is what we call a species specific relationship, where it isn't like when the adults get to the point where they're looking for nectar and pollen, they're often much more generalist. But often those larvae are specific. So you can also look up insects that are in your area specifically, and that can be a good cue for what to include in your garden. And I do have some resources in the handout that are specific to Washington and who our pollinators are and what they need. So do think of those leaves. And then we often forget about insects. Like plants are the base of the ecosystem, but insects are also a really important foundational food for so many creatures, and that can be other insects as well. So, hummingbirds eat lots of insects. Bats eat insects, many different kinds. So, the more that we can cultivate a healthy insect population in our garden, the more that we are feeding a broader pyramid of wildlife. So, that's important. And it can be little things. Many of our pollinators are beneficial insects as well. And so, here I want to give the example of hoverflies and lacewings, where the larval form are really important predatory beneficial insects. And then they go on, the adult form is a really important pollinator. So that's something to think about that, yeah, we just want to respect that whole big life cycle. So we also want to have a water source in our garden for these pollinators, and that can look like a variety of things. So it's okay to have more than one water source. Sometimes it's as simple as letting there be a depression that you don't mulch out or rake up, where moisture can accumulate, so that the puddle sippers can land and they have a place to sip water. And something that's really important about that particular style of water source is that minerals from the soil are able to dissolve and become available to those puddle sippers. So it's different than like a bird bath or a water feature that we would make, because there may not be some of those same nutrients present. And then, so that's, think about that. And then if you are making a water source, a few different things to think about would be like in this upper left image, I hope it displays the same way. And that I still remember to tell my left and right, but to have little pebbles or marbles or things for the critters to land on and then to crawl their way down into the water. It's a little subtle in here, but can you see the little bees? They're flying and they're landing and they're crawling down into the crevices to sip the water. Whereas other creatures are happier with dripping water. So like a lot of birds will prefer a moving water. So if you can set up a drip or a trickle, or maybe it's a recirculating fountain, where they can get the drips and be attracted by that moving water. And then the different depths. So make sure that you have perches and rocks and things like that for the critters. And then when it's freezing, maybe go warm it up. I tend to pour some hot water in my bird bath on the frozen mornings to thaw it. And usually I'm thanked by many different visitors. And then the shelter and nesting. Everybody likes to live in a house, right? Even if it's a little bug. So it can be as simple as having a brush pile in your yard. And the piles of wood are an incredible habitat. So many creatures use a pile of wood. You can also make it decorative. So here someone has taken these cages and they've piled a variety of materials that offer different shape and sized openings for something to nest in. You can buy habitat houses with different sized holes drilled in different materials, or you can just leave your garden, and I hope you can leave your garden kind of wild. So we're going to talk a lot about nesting crevices. If you do buy a man-made nesting bug hotel, it's important that you keep it tidied because some of those can become a real disease problem, or like some of the insect pests, insects on insects, some of those insect pests that ride on our insect preferred friends, I hope that made sense, tend to proliferate in those places. And so kind of in that middle summer after everybody has emerged, but before nesting begins anew. And the tricky thing is it varies with different life cycles. But sometimes it's good to kind of do a restart. So anyway, we'll talk more of that. Okay, so design ideas for pollinator refuge. This is a nice little snapshot of a tiny little spot in someone's garden. They've got some plants. They've got a water feature that offers, that's got some floating stuff on it so that there's landing pads. They have many different horizons of plants, layers for creatures. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, spatial complexity. And then they've got a bug hotel. So even if it's tiny like this, it is better than nothing. So, your garden does not have to be large to be impactful, and especially if we are making a complicated space. And when I say that, I take inspiration, for instance, from this grass roof company. If you look up John Little, he's a pretty interesting character. And I'm guessing that this is probably, he is in England, I think. And so I'm guessing that this is like a garden show thing. But let's look at this space and all that's going on in here. So it's hard to see over on this tiny side, but this is either a rammed earth or a gabion cage wall. He's got insect hotel kind of wall hanging things on the side. He's got a green roof, but rather than a solid panel being what retains the soil or soilless medium here, it is screened so that you could have, oops, I did not mean to advance, so that you could have pollinators sneaking in there and being able to nest in that soil. And then in the foreground, we've got another bug hotel, but it's located in a dry stack stone wall, which offers a gazillion crevices. He's got different kinds of hole sizes for different species. Some prefer teeny tiny holes and some prefer bigger holes. And then he's got grassy things for larvae and foliage eaters. He's got trees. Birches are actually a really good wildlife plant. And then he's got flowering things also for nectar. So it's a small space. It has a lot of functionality. So if you are taking care to make your garden features do double, triple, quadruple duty, you can really encourage abundance of biodiversity. So here, and this again is from this same grass roof company. So this is like some kind of a resin planter that he has drilled decorative hole pattern in so that the soil nesting creatures can go into those crevices and build their nests and get to the soil, but you still have a nice plant in a pot. And probably water might seep out of that as well. And that would be a sipping place for somebody to get some moisture. He's got he's got big planters in a gabion wall cage that then offer some different crevice sizes and different. I know that he fills them with stone and sand and even some clay to get some different kind of soils for different creatures that provide different things, or that, want different kinds of nesting materials. Here we've got a steel habitat pole that has all these holes drilled in it, and it's filled with sand. It's in the middle of a nice meadow. And then he's pretty famous for these bike shelters. And so again, with the habitat thing here, the gabion cage, probably these posts are drilled or could be drilled with holes for creatures, and then a green roof up on top. So lots of stacked functions, manipulated elements to make that small space really, really matter. I thought it would be fun to look at a couple of nests in crevices. They are like a work of art, I think. And so this is just some kind of tubed thing. I think it's a reed that the creature has. This is a leaf cutter bee that has sealed its crevice up with little pieces of leaf cuttings. And then another one here where the paper has allowed, this paper sort of scrolled up in the hole, has allowed for this drilled hole size to not be a limiting factor. The paper allows the creature to kind of customize it to whatever size they want. It also makes it easier to clean because you can pull those tubes out and then roll up fresh ones for spring. And then you can keep this is a whole mason bee class, so let's not go into that, but you can put them into the fridge for the winter and then put them out in the spring. But that's a way to also help keep that habitat a little cleaner. So many of our important bees and other insects are ground nesters. And I feel like that is something that gets forgotten when we're thinking about making pollinator gardens. And so it really, I implore you, when you're going to start a day of gardening in an area, just stop for a little bit and watch the area where you are going to work and look for holes in the ground and look for critters flying back and forth and emerging. I had a instant where I have stones all kind of lining my garden bed at my driveway edge. And my husband bought a boat, which is another contentious tale. But he needed a bigger turning radius. So I needed to push back. I had to make my garden bed smaller for the damn boat. So I had to push back this stone edging. And I just went in with my human drive in there and I barreled in and I just started pulling the rocks apart. And then I noticed here's this leaf cutter bee, and she has a beautiful hot pink petal, a piece of a Clarkia flower. And she's flying around and she's hovering and looking at what had been, I'm sure, her nest in one of the crevices of those edging rocks. And it just broke my heart. I wished that I had stopped and looked for a few minutes because then I could have acted differently to preserve her nest. Anyway, so that's my personal tale. But so we need to stop and look before we work. And we need to dig with care. We need to leave some bare ground. I think that so much of our garden education has been on mulch, mulch, mulch. We've got to mulch. Mulch is the best thing for a garden. But I think that sometimes there might be an argument to not mulch. So, and the ground nesting argument would be one for leaving some areas unmulched, especially if you have clayey soil or sandy soil, leave some spots bare for the insects. Also, don't use landscape fabric because landscape fabric prevents anybody from being able to dig and find a nest in there. And then maybe try to identify in your garden beds a few footfall spots. So I use little tiny paver stones, or I'll put like a cluster of, maybe golf ball size rocks or so to make a spot where I know that's where I step, so that I'm not just constantly treading in different places and both compacting the soil, but also possibly disturbing insects. Um, on that note about mulching and poor soil and stony soils, there's a lot of emerging information on what's called the open mosaic habitat. And some of this is because it has to do with disturbed sites. But also, if you've ever gone hiking, I thought I heard you talking about somebody in the Wenatchee area. So if you've ever gone hiking in that area on the east side of the mountains between like Leavenworth and Wenatchee, or kind of any alpine site or whatever, in an area that looks like this, where the soil is kind of rocky, sandy, um, it's really common to see an abundance of insects there. And even, well, you ain't from the same parts I'm from, but I'm on here on Whidbey, and we have a very popular walking trail here that has a lot of sandy, gravelly soil. And it's almost hard to stay on the trail during the summer because so many ground nesting insects love that dirt that has been treaded naked by humans. But they love that soil because it doesn't have a lot of green growth on it. And so they're able to find a place to nest. So anyway, that's a little something for you that kind of challenges some of the things we've thought about um, in our gardening practices. So if you're interested in making a bee bank, I have some more details in my handouts, but basically you make a pile of rocks or logs and then you put a clayey, sandy, fine gravelly mix over the top and leave it like that so that they have a place to nest. So there's that. You can find more details in the handout. So crevice habitats are another kind of thing to include in your garden. So in addition to naked soil, you can either like a dry stacked stone wall, which is what's here on the left, so that this isn't necessarily mortared. There's lots of little bits and bobs, and this is what I had that the leaf cutter was nesting in. So, and because there's different size crevices, different creatures can get in there and hide. So you'll get lots of spiders, which are excellent bird food, and excellent beneficials. And then you'll get lots of different, bees and wasps and things. And a lot of people are scared of bees, but largely the bees that are the better pollinators are not the ones that sting. And many of the wasps don't necessarily like this kind of habitat. So, and many of them are friendly if you just don't provoke them. But don't be scared about having things like this in your garden. I think that's one of the biggest obstacles we have in promoting insect-friendly gardens is people's fear of insects. And that is something I really would love to see shift, but that's another little sort of passion rant. Crevice gardens are a new fun thing. I know our Master Gardener demonstration garden on Whidbey has a couple of different crevice garden ideas. So they're fun for growing a new kind of plant. And they're also really great for pollinator habitat. And I'd like to point out that in this particular crevice habitat garden, there's also many great pollinator flowers that you can grow in them. So this is probably an erigeron. Many of those, they're called the fleabanes, and there's lots of different kinds. They are all excellent pollinator food sources. This looks like it could be a dianthus or some kind of pinks. Those are also great for pollinators. Maybe this is Oregon sunshine, which is another good native flowering perennial that's great for some of our native pollinators. And there are several native erigerons. Anyway, so do some dry stacking, piling, crevice making. That can be a fun way to add ornamental interest to your garden and then also bring a bunch of habitat. Gabion walls are really also great pollinator. I like this one. Talk about stacked functionality, right? So they've got their gabion wall, but inside of it, it's hiding, this maybe is it, it's hiding the reservoir for their water feature. But there's certainly a lot of dry rock crevices where somebody could make a little nest. And then certainly creatures could crawl around on these rocks and drink up some water. And that cascade of water is sure to attract all sorts of critters to that water. So you can buy cages that you fill yourself, or you can make your own. And here is a beautiful retaining wall made from a gabion structure. But I've seen people like use these around a mailbox post, or, you know, it doesn't have to be any fancy big architectural thing. It can be just a little moment, and it can still add a lot of habitat interest. Piled wood is an excellent habitat for your garden. I would recommend that you do not make your brush pile against a tree, because many creatures that like to do not great things for trees will live in a brush pile. So I don't ever love to see this, or like people that stack firewood between trees. It's probably better not to put that in your trees, but take a moment of care and make your brush pile be kind of a sculptural element in your garden, as simply as being a pile. Or you can do what's called a dead hedge, and that is when you drive in some vertical stakes and then you just pile your brush. And it can be simple as a straight thing that can be a great wall screen, or you can get sculptural with it. Have some fun. But that dead wood pile is so snakes and birds and amphibians, reptiles, insects like crazy. Lots of creatures like a wood pile. And rotting wood in itself is a great thing to add to your garden. So here's some other fun sculptural ways that you can add rotting wood to your garden, as simple as just like edging your garden with logs and letting them sort of decompose the long way. Or you can get kind of, you know, it can be interesting to do some stumps. And you could even drill holes in these stumps to really amp up the functionality for creatures. And then also that adds water holding capacity to your garden soil, and it adds really good for your soil decomposers. That's a whole nother layer of habitat for a whole different little ecosystem in your garden, but we're not talking about soil ecosystem today, so we'll move on. And then stumperies, that can be fun. And here are some ideas about stumperies. That's a whole like a thing from the Victorian era, but it's fun to include that in your garden, and it can be sculptural as well as beneficial habitat. All right, so those were some habitat ideas or shelter ideas. Now we're going to talk about food more. So planting considerations when you are designing for pollinators. Things to think about is having both the leaves, like we talked about, as well as the flowers, because we're feeding the different life cycles of different creatures. And so I guess I should back it up and say insects eat leaves, and then they need pollen and nectar. And so pollen is the protein and nectar is the carb, it's the sugar. And so most insects need both of those. I think that the birds, the hummingbirds, and those things, they get their protein from other insects, not so much pollen, but they definitely use the carbohydrate of the nectar. So, so that's just something to know. And then include different kinds of leaves for different kinds of creatures. Monarchs need milkweed, but they're not going to eat your nettles or your birches. I've got some things throughout the handout. I do reference a few specific insects and what they need, but that it's so, I mean, you could have a whole talk on just the insects and their needs. So anyway, variety is the spice of life, right? So in our garden, I don't know about you all, but I am a total plantaholic. I want one of everything. And so this is a good excuse to have diversity in the landscape. That said, For many insects, it's helpful to have blocks of the same thing. So don't just buy one, buy 7, buy 24, make divisions and plant them around. Do things in drifts, not just in spots, especially for the bees that like to go from flower to flower to flower to flower. It's easier if they're all kind of in one grouping. So that is something to think about when you're planning your planting style, is to do drifts of things. Try to have something in every season. So this is where if you are focused on a native garden, but you crave to cheat from that native only, I don't want to call it dogma because that has kind of a bad connotation, but that message that we've had, which we're going to talk about in a few slides here, but it's really great for us to expand the season. And so use some of those ornamentals to bridge the gaps when your native plants are not in flower. And or explore a bigger range of native plant. So I think we can do better in including a greater variety of natives in our gardens, but I think we also don't need to feel guilty about including some non-natives as long as we're not planting invasive plants, so that there's every day of the year, there's something for someone to eat, and stop those hunger gaps. The other thing that's pretty important is to think about irrigation. So we want to be climate smart and we want to be responsible about watering, but we do need to irrigate to keep the nectar pumping. Otherwise, the plants will shut down their flowering, and then that leaves some hungry pollinators. So we'll talk about smart irrigation. You want to also include night bloomers for your moths. And then when you're choosing your plants, try to get singles. Avoid things that are pollen sterile. So, like, for instance, in the land of the sunflowers, there are many varieties that say, like, great for cutting, pollen sterile. That's not going to be good for your pollinators. So, you want the old-fashioned sunflowers that are for making sunflower seeds. Those will make all your pollinators really happy, and they'll make your birds super happy. But on this idea of natives only, and I have a whole little subsection in my references handout about this, I think that England and the UK really leads in the gardening world. They seem to be more advanced than we are. And so they've done a lot more than I am aware of, having been documented in America. So all my research, or not research, but all my references are for UK stuff, but it still holds. So it started like 30 years ago. This woman, Jennifer Owen, is an entomologist. I think maybe was an entomologist. I don't know if she's still with us, but she started to document the wildlife in her garden. And she published a couple of books and people started to pay attention. And then there's been several studies done. These are just 2 of them, and the full name of them and authors and stuff are in the resources section. Anyway, so Jennifer Owen did this thing. Then there was the bugs, and it's like biodiversity in urban gardens study or something like that. It's also in the references. They did a bunch of studies, and then so this is Great Dixter in the lower left-hand corner. They did a biodiversity audit, and several of the Royal Hort Society, like the National Trust Gardens, several of them are doing these biodiversity studies. And what they're doing is they're documenting the insects in their spaces in the gardens, like where they are. So at Dixter, for instance, you can look at like the mortar crevices in the house wall, and they'll talk about who's there. And then who's nesting in the potting shed roof, whatever. They have it broken down. But what they are seeing is that compared to native-only preserves, they have a way higher level of biodiversity of insects in garden-rich spaces where people, yes, have natives in their gardens, but also have a lot of other things. And so there is a really convincing argument to not be so puritanical. And yes, it's important to include natives, but it's okay to include other things too, as long as they're not invasive, so that we can really support a range of critters and give them, basically it's like that food desert concept, like some populations are underserved because there's not a quality grocery store in their neighborhood. It's the same thing with pollinators. So if we can be very mindful and considered about what we plant and why we're planting it and choose correctly, we can create a food oasis in our neighborhoods and help cut down on those food deserts for pollinators. So there we go. I am not a natives only purist, and this is part of the reason why. So season extension, I've talked about that plenty, but here's a few things that would be great to have in your garden for like now and soon. So many different Mahonias you could choose from. There is one for every niche, from the Mahonia repens, which is tiny low, on up to the Mahonia ex medias that are quite large. Crocus are really great. I have some that are already flowering, which is nuts. The grape hyacinth, heathers, heaths. I had a gazillion slides in here on plants, but I feared I would run out of time, and those are easy to find lists. But anyway, think about season extension in your garden. And then strategic watering. You do need to water your plants, but you do want to be smart about it. So when we use spray irrigation, it can actually wash the nectar off of the flowers, which is not desirable. And pollinators. So I would encourage you to use drip irrigation, very targeted. Do it in the very early morning, maybe when it's still dim, so that the soil doesn't have sun on it yet to evaporate that water, and when the water can really penetrate. But you do need to water to keep your flowers re-nectaring. Okay, let's talk about spatial complexity and mosaic planting. So basically, this is me giving you an excuse to go shopping. You need to do it because you need to support the pollinators, but you need all the plants in your garden, and you need them at all of the levels in your garden. So what I love about this garden here on the left is they've got a flowering ground cover that is interacting nicely with the crevices in their stacked stone wall. And then they have things from tiny plants to a grassy layer to slightly taller flowering plant layer, to shrubs, to small trees, to big trees. They've got a plant at every level, which is excellent diversity of habitat. So this garden is probably teeming with insects and birds because of all of the spatial complexity of this garden. Here's another big spatial complexity garden. So this one maybe has a little more of that meadow vibe, but you can see it's got lots of plants at different levels interacting and interweaving. So in my never humble opinion about what a really great garden is, that is for climate adaptation, that is for wildlife and pollinator friendly, is when we don't see soil, when we have plants that cover the ground, not necessarily our traditional carpet making ground covers. It could be a poofy thing, but we don't see ground because we've got plants filling in all those niches and levels, like nature would do. And so work with nature instead of having a bark exposed, mulch exposed garden. Plant some plants to occupy all those layers. Your plants will be happier, your soil ecosystem will be happier, and your insect and bird communities will be happier. One thing you can do is to adapt a meadow kind of mindset, or make your lawn do better, basically. And I have a lot of information in here about sort of like eco-friendly lawn care. Tips for you. I'm not going to talk about that as much, but try, like some of us, we just need lawn. Lawn is not inherently bad. It's usually the way we upkeep our lawn that is what turns it into a bad thing. But if we can rethink lawn from being such a purist Edwardian grass only thing to maybe an imperfect space that has clovers, that has some little flowering plants. Look at those no-mow mixes. Look at the eco-lawn mixes. Look for things that are flowering. Try not to mow as often, mow high. And that can be, if we can have more of a pollinator-friendly lawn, then it's less of a food desert, because our like golf course lawns are pretty much a huge food desert for pollinators, not to mention all of the chemicals that are going into that. And then I'm sorry, this picture is actually really grainy at this size, but the concept is I I know that there's a lot of interest in making mini meadows, and that can be a tricky craft in and of itself. So I have a whole meadow section in my resources to help um, figure that out a little bit, how to do that. And I'm happy for you to email me and ask me things. But I also know that there's a lot of neighborhoods that have restrictions about how tall your grass can be and everything. So, one thing I would suggest, there's a concept of cues of care, which I bet you've heard of, but just keeping the edge mowed sends a message like, well, this isn't a neglected space. We're doing this on purpose. And then I cannot stress enough the importance and the helpfulness of signs. So when you put a sign that says this is mini meadow, or this is a pollinator garden, this is wildlife life habitat, people then look differently at that messy yard, and they see that it isn't there's a method to this madness, right? And then you might get people asking you questions, and when you spark interest, like, most people want to do good things, most people do like animals and they want to help, you can really affect a lot of change with a little bit of signage. So there's a little plug for that. Another thing we can do with our planting considerations is design for death, partly because when we are doing a habitat friendly garden maintenance regime, we aren't cleaning up. We're not doing a fall cleanup. We want to leave things standing dead. And so if you have considered what a plant looks like when it dies into your choosing of what plants to include in your garden, and you embrace some sexy dead things, then you can have a garden that has more winter interest, offers more winter habitat. You can use a lot of seed bearing plants, and you can really bring in a lot of wildlife who can then use that seed source for winter food. And it's more beautiful, and you're less inclined to want to groom it and take away all of that overwintering habitat. So Pete Udoff is a wonderful inspiration. There's a bunch of British designers who have kind of glommed onto this, and English too. I don't mean to knock American garden designers and American gardeners. So there's lots of resources that you can find, but here's a few of my favorite things. You do have to be a little careful with some things. Like, I have globe thistle in my garden, and I, for years, let it do its thing and be winter interest. And I've had to stop because I have globe thistle coming up everywhere. So I just take its heads off, but I leave its stems and its leaves for winter structure. It's pretty nice for quite a while. Anyway, so that's something to think about. And then we also need to think about how we maintain our gardens to maintain them as pollinator friendly spaces. So much like I just mentioned, leaving dead things standing so that there's both places for larvae to hide and eggs to hide, and seeds to eat. We want to also just not be raking and clearing away all the little hidey holes and crevices. I think that tidy will be the death of us as a society. We have tidied our way out of all natural cycles. And if we can embrace letting nature be nature in our gardens a lot more, we would restore health to so many ecosystems, like the soil ecosystem and the insect. We would really regain a lot of health in our gardens just by letting nature cycle. Yeah. So I did mention if you're going to go to work, tread lightly in your garden. Stop and look for a little bit first. See who is using what. See who is where. Where are the nests? Where are the shelters? Where are the food sources? Who's benefiting from these spaces? Do I need to prune that dead wood out, or can I leave that dead wood for habitat? If I'm going to take the dead wood out, can I put it on a brush pile somewhere in my yard instead, or can I make some fun sculptural element out of it? Just remember that you are sharing this space with these creatures, or really probably more like these creatures are sharing their space with you. So, yeah, that's just a way to be mindful when you're going to start gardening. It's irresistible to want to weed, but we do need to stop and ask ourselves, if we need to weed yet, is this plant truly a weed? Can I leave it for another couple of days? Can I treat it differently? So in my garden right now, I am leaving a lot of the lamium seedlings because I know that they're going to flower and they're going to be a really important first food for bumblebees. And I really want to encourage bumblebees to thrive. So I will definitely cut them or pull them once they are mostly flowered out. Like I'm going to be removing some flowers, but I'm going to let all these top flowers kind of be open and be, supped upon. And then before they start setting seed, I'll either cut, part of the plant off or I'll rip it out, but I'm going to not take them yet. The other thing is that when some of these early season weeds are just growing, they're really providing a good service for the soil ecosystem because roots in soil are very important as a way to keep the nutrient cycle happening. So, if you do have some naked soil and you've got weeds in it, maybe they're providing a good ecosystem service at first. So think about how you manage them. Like in this dandelion, I would definitely leave them open for the nectar and pollen seekers, but I'd be trying to grab this head before it went to seed. And I would drop that in my burn pile probably. Anyway, chickweed, there are some native chickweeds that are weeds in our garden, but they're actually native ground covers. Same thing with this plantain. Plantain is a native. Some of it is. And some plantains are really important. Boy, I put it in the handout. I want to say it's maybe the Taylor's checker spot butterfly. It is a super important food source for its larva. So, is it really a weed, or can you learn to share with this? Or can you have an area of your garden where you don't mind if weeds are there maybe longer or at all? Can we plant bigger shrubs so that we don't notice the weeds as much and they can become not much weeds as much as they would be sort of a naturally provided ground cover layer? We just need to kind of think differently and think through and try to do a little better for our pollinators. We need to accept imperfection in our gardens. And I feel like we are in this plight of having a pollinator crisis because as landscape mentality, it has been so demanding of perfection for so long that we have become scared of nature. We want to expect ridiculous things from nature. We want it to be perfect. And really, if you see a little chunk out of a leaf like this, instead of saying, what's eating my plant? I've got to spray. If you can think of like, oh, look, I've got someone here that's sharing my garden with me. think differently, accept some imperfection. Don't be hot to grab for the sprays. Try to encourage that in people as you teach them that it's all right. Like nature will balance herself. If we can just leave some of the pests, like so many beneficial insects need aphids to be able to come to your garden. So if you don't have some pests, you won't be able to sustain your beneficials. So we have to seek that balance. And I even have a beef with the whole concept of IPM because I feel like encouraging IPM still comes from this prevailing mindset that insects are pests, that there is a problem. And I'd like to kind of walk back from that a bit and not instantly presume there's a problem. So anyway, and I think a lot of that comes from the pesticide companies and, but that's a whole other rant. So I have a no pesticide policy in my garden. I wish everyone did, because chances are it's going to bother things. So you were talking about dormant oil spraying at the prelude to this meeting. And I can pipe in and say it has to do with the openness of the bud. So if your flower bud is still fairly tight, you're still okay to spray a little bit. But remember that the dormant oils suffocate any insect they land on. And yes, there may be some problematic insects in your orchard, codling moth or apple maggot, and you do want to oil them. But not since we're having such a warm spring, if you spray dormant oil while the pollinators and the beneficials are out, you will also kill them because the oil will suffocate them. So it's really important to spray early before they're flying, or spray at twilight when they've kind of all gone to their nests, or just tolerate. I know it's a really difficult balance, but it's just something to think about and really be mindful of. And always choose the least toxic, but really ask yourself if it's necessary. And if it is, how can I do the best way to do the least harm? The other thing is, we all, I think, I hope, know that neonicotinoids are not great. They are systemic in the plant. So once the plant has been treated with them, they are in that plant for a very, very long time. And they will, anybody that sucks on that plant will die. And anybody that eats that insect, like the aphid whitefly beetle or mealybug, that has taken up some of that systemic insecticide will also be killed. So if you are unable to resist the deal that many plants are at some of the big box stores, you should tread with care. And many times they have this tag in them that tells you that that plant has been treated. And I would beg you to boycott that plant and also that store. But you want to think about that. I can tell you for sure that if you are buying perennials and some annuals, sometimes at the garden centers, you'll see them in kind of like a brick red pot that says Blooming Advantage on the side. The pot is very clearly logoed from that grower called Blooming, and they are a no neonicotinoid and also a very sustainable grower. So sometimes the prices on those plants are a little higher, but I vote with my dollars and I buy Blooming plants whenever I have the choice because I know that that grower is doing a superior job in making sure their plants are as less toxic as they can be. Another operation that's really good is F and B, like flying and bug, F and B. And I don't know that they're really labeled, but you should be able to ask the grower at your local the buyer at your local garden center if they carry either of those growers. And if so, support those growers and tell your garden center that you appreciate that they are intentionally stocking plants that are sprayed less. So that's good feedback for your garden centers. Okay, now there is the topic of mulch. And until I began to really learn a lot about pollinator gardening, I was a big mulch advocate. But I am backing off of that a little bit. And I know that sounds maybe heretical. Um, but I was hoping to introduce a few heretical verging topics as food for thought, like the biodiversity topic, and then this one. So I think a lot of people mulch out of habit, and they may not be as mindful with their mulching. And especially if we are opting for bark mulch, we could be mulching better. So we need to ask ourselves, I mean, if I were giving a mulching talk, I would say, well, there's fertile mulch and infertile mulch, and you need to think about what you need. But um, do you even need to mulch? So here in this sort of right-hand most thing is a garden that has mulched with a sandy gravel. So this would be an infertile mulch, and it is supporting a lean plant community. It is probably helping with weed suppression. It's providing an abundance of habitat for pollinators, and it isn't over enriching our soil. And I heard a great fellow whose name I cannot recall, but he was talking about when we make our soils so fertile, by and large, I'm not talking about veggie gardens, but for like, our ornamental landscape, our, on the whole, um, our soils are largely fertile enough for many plants to live in. And the plants that make the best use of too much fertility are weeds. So if you are having a weed problem, you might have a situation of over fertility, and you might have a situation of too much ground exposed. In which case, I would say, do you really need a mulch, or do you just need to plant some more plants? So, like, we could skin the cat a different way, right? So maybe we need to mulch with a different um, medium, a different material. Maybe we don't need to mulch. Or if your soil really does need enhancing, maybe you need like a cover crop more than a mulch. Use a green mulch. Get some roots in your soil. Get some decomposing material on top, but like the most rich would be the green mulches, right? They're the most fertile. Anyway, just think about mulching. Are you going to be suffocating some ground nesters? Are you switching habitat? Are you overfeeding your weeds? Or in the case of this leftmost mulch, which is meant to represent chop and drop, do you already have mulch at your disposal that you could be applying, but you are raking it away? And if you stopped, then you wouldn't need to mulch. Or are you composting? And then you can spread your compost back, which is really great. If you don't know what chop and drop is when it comes time for garden cleanup. I use a hedge clipper, like a manual kind for a good arm workout. And if you chop everything in like 1 to couple 3-4 inch increments, it's imprecise because you're using hedge clippers. And then you just let it litter the soil so that you get, like, if you have a tubular shaped plant like a sedum or a delphinium, or there's many of them, that falls on the soil, and it's a natural nesting tube for tube nesting critters. And then if there's leaves, they're decomposing, and that is letting nature feed herself, right? So if we think about the ecosystem of a forest or a meadow, plants grow up. There is some level of death cycle. If it's a meadow, like everything dies back. If it's a forest, the leaves fall down from the trees or in the shrubs, right? And that organic material hits the soil, and then the soil community comes up and grabs at everything. And also, there's usually a woody component in the forest, right? So, and that's what makes the best soil. So if we can let our gardens just fall down onto themselves, we will create more of a closed loop system, where we are letting our gardens feed themselves. The fertility that they are taking from the soil to grow their own body parts then goes back down and gets given back to the soil, right? So then you aren't losing things. It's when we take that away that we are losing that nutrient. But if we let it go back to the soil, then it just recycles. And it can become more abundant because of the insects. So anyway, think a little bit about mulching and what you're accomplishing, what you're using, why you're doing it. Maybe you don't need to be mulching. So there's my little, and maybe the best mulch, maybe this is my next slide, maybe it isn't, is to do more with annual annual plants, especially like native annuals, such as like Douglas meadowfoam and Clarkias and baby blue eyes, Gilia, Nemophilia. It's one I don't know how to pronounce, Leia. I think they call it tidy tips. Anyway, California poppy even. That you can spread those. They will suppress the weeds because they'll grow so vigorously, and then they'll flower and they'll provide a food source. And then they die in the summer. Usually their bodies die down, composting back down, and then the summer flowering plants can take over. So anyway, mulching is a complex topic, actually. A very important piece of pollinator garden maintenance is deadheading. Plants make flowers in order to create seeds. That's what they want. That's their agenda. It's a benefit that they've figured out how to manipulate the world around them by attracting insects. And if you have not read The Light Eaters, you should definitely read The Light Eaters. It's really, really fascinating. Anyway, but the plant's agenda in making a flower is to make a seed to, propagate itself. When we deadhead and we take those flowers away before the seed is able to perform, we frustrate the plants and they will make more flowers, which really makes the pollinators happy. So we can create more floral abundance in our gardens by deadheading and keeping those floral resources coming. But I would put a plug in to knowing a little bit about the bloom time of that plant. And when you get close to the end of that bloom cycle, then do let it stop for a little bit so that you can develop seeds, so that you can either let things self-sow in your garden, and or you can feed the seed eaters, or both. But we can when we think of our gardens as an ecosystem like that we want to let things propagate, if you like it, have more of it. And so you do want to stop deading at some point so that you can allow seed formation. Boy, I whipped through a bunch of stuff, and I hope that there are a lot of questions, but we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. And going back to that idea of social contagion, there's a lot of bad landscaping out there. There's so much more bad landscaping than there is good landscaping. We need to set a different example. We need to help people realize, because mostly people aren't thinking when they're looking at landscapes. Most people don't know better. They drive through their entire neighborhood and all they see is gumdrops and bark mulch. So they think that that's what a garden is supposed to be. And we need to be the educators and the rule setters to show people that that isn't actually what a real garden is. And, if you care for the wildlife around you, then no gumdrops and no beauty bark. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I'll figure out how to get off of this screen share in a few moments so that we can take questions. And and then you have the resources in your handout, but I didn't put it on here because it's so long. It would be like 5 slides. So
it is a long list, but I tell you, it's what a delight to have you share with us here today, Tobey. This has really been super fun. So, by the way, lots of stuff I put in the chat accompanying.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Accompanying Tobey's talk here. But I want to make sure that, first off, the first thing we posted, of course, was the handout that Tobey provided. If anybody's having trouble accessing that through the chat, just send me an email and I can push it out to you. And indeed, make sure that we're sharing that, the handout appropriately. Hey, questions and comments for Tobey, please share.
I do see one about a plum tree, and it says a third of the flowers are open. Oh my gosh, you are in a warm spot. Definitely do not spray any dormant spray on a tree that's got flowers open. How early? Wow. Um, yeah, it's going to be a crazy year, isn't it?
Karen, you have your hand up.
Yes, I would like to first of all thank Tobey. This has been fantastic, and I would love to have you come back and talk to us again.
I would be happy to. Note my email. Thank you.
Questions, comments for Tobey? Tobey, I just actually love I think your name is great because you have the word obey in your Tobey. You know, it's a great message for an instructor, right? You know, it's a great subliminal meeting here as we. Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I am a very bossy girl, so I really do wish more people would obey me.
Questions and comments.
Funny.
By the way, it's very great comments about the deadheading in particular, as you closed with here, right? Because, you know, we do emphasize a lot about not deadheading, but I can appreciate the fact that during the growing season of a plant, right, you know, deadheading will promote more blooms.
Yeah, you kind of, I mean, it's with all things gardening. We have to ask ourselves why we are doing this and why, like, do we need to? And a lot of times, yes, you need to deadhead. And like the good news is that means you can cut a lot of bouquets and not feel guilty. But if you're doing it to maximize seed production or for birds or whatever, maybe you want to deadhead less. So it's sort of who you're intending your usage to. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Questions, comments here. There's so much you covered. Yes, Gwen.
So I'm really interested in the deadhead stuff. I did have to like quit feeding any birds in the winter because when I looked out one day, there were like 6 little baby rats, you know, coming out of the ivy next door and stuff. So what is the idea about, you know, rodents and the dead hedge? Is that kind of a misnomer that's just going to be a you know, shelter for them, or what's the idea there?
Yeah, well, I mean, a dead hedge does offer shelter for rodents, be they the nasty ones, or I don't know if like squirrels count as rodents. But if you are not using bird seed, then you will really cut down on the number of creatures because the insects in the dead hedge are going to be not anywhere near as appealing to rats. So you would scale down to more of a native rodent population. So there is that. I mean, kind of the theory of the dead hedge is even more than shelter for the higher life forms. It's the invertebrates. So because it is such good, excellent habitat for insects, it really attracts insect eaters like birds. And yes, things will nest in there, but if you are controlling the amount of seed you're feeding, because you're bringing in a different type of creature when you're doing that, you can continue to feed your birds by encouraging an insect population, but cut down on the amount of rats you attract. So a dead hedge might actually be a really excellent substitute for a bird feeder in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Try it. Yeah.
Tobey, why do you think the British were so far ahead of us in some of this thinking, the roof lawn and so forth?
Well, I think for starters, they're an older country, so they've been gardening longer. And I think that by having a lot of those old preserved estates where gardening started as a show of wealth and influence and opulence, but there was also a need for a lot of smaller food economy because they don't have the vast land that we have for as much like mass agriculture. So I think their small food economy is a little bit healthier. And that all kind of like collides to have a different sort of brain set. But they've been more supportive of their gardening culture, I think, than we are in the US. I don't know exactly why that is, but I think it just has to do with age and the accessibility to people with so many more old preserved estates with gardens. You know, there's several in every region that people can go and spend the day and have a look. Whereas we have less of that. So I think people just don't interact with it as readily.
Mhm.
I don't know. Um, it may simply be because I glommed on to some British gardening things early in my garden admiring career. And um, and so I'm focused on that. I mean, I get Gardens Illustrated magazine and I study it like the Bible every time it comes. And if you don't watch Monty Don, come on, you got to watch Monty Don. Um, but yeah, I think I mean, Monty Don is on their public accessed television over there. And I think all the garden shows that we have, I mean, who has TV anymore? But I can't think of a mainstream network that has a garden show on it in our America. I could be wrong, but I don't know. It's my thought.
Questions, comments for Tobey?
I've blown people's minds.
You have indeed
That's
opened us
good.
up in here. And so again, in the handout, and of course on your slide, your email is there, and and we're obviously we thank you for encouraging us to reach out for questions or for comments, and and the fact that this is your profession, so you actually have an opportunity to come in and to consult, right, on landscaping practices and garden design.
Sure, I do. And I'm quite a ways from you folks, but I'm also like a pretty big garden dork. So I'm very happy to have an email. If someone is stumped, if you want to send me some pictures, I would like to be approachable. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question, even though I'm not in your area. If you have a garden club that needs a Zoom speaker, I have many different talks that I love to give, and I'm always happy to pull together a talk on another topic if there's something that your group has been thinking, we'd love to know about X. Maybe I can help. But yeah, if something pops into your mind later, oh, I wish I'd asked her this, feel free to email me. And I don't have a website right now. I'm working on it. I'm in between, so don't go looking for the website yet. But hopefully by the end of the month, I'll have one up, and eventually I'll do a newsletter or something like that. So,
But you are on Facebook, and I have put your email address
yep.
into the chat.
Thank you. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for having me. And thank you for being master gardeners and going and educating the public. It's so important and valuable. So I greatly appreciate the work that you all do because I know you're very dedicated and hardworking and you devote a lot of hours to that. So thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. We'll
Take
call
care.
it
Happy
good for today.
spring.
Remember, Foundation Board meeting at 1 p.m., same URL. Thanks
Bye.
again, everyone.